My wife looked at me, and her eyes held a coldness I hadn't seen in our 40 years of marriage. Her manicured fingertips tapped rhythmically against my mahogany desk. Then she let out a dry, hollow laugh that sent a chill straight to my bones. Harry, from now on, you'll need to ask me for lunch money. Don't bother with the credit cards and don't look at the bank accounts. If you want a single cent for a cup of coffee, you ask me first. If I'm in a good mood, maybe I'll grant your request. My son, the boy I raised and put through the best schools, sat there nodding, looking at his mother with pure admiration. They thought they had won. They thought this old man was finished. But they had no idea they'd just started a war they could never win. My name is Harry Coleman. I'm 72, and until that Tuesday morning, I truly believed I was the head of a loving family. I built Coleman Construction from a single pickup truck and a rusty toolbox into a multi-million-dollar empire. I gave Brenda a life of incredible luxury. I gave Ryan a career he never earned. I thought I was respected. I was wrong. If you're new here, take a deep breath, because I'm about to share a nightmare that could happen to anyone the moment you trust the wrong people, even those who share your blood. If you've ever been betrayed by family, hit that like button. It helps this story reach those who need to hear it. Please subscribe so you don't miss how I turn the tables, and let me know in the comments. Which city are you watching from? I love hearing where you're all tuning in from. Everything started on what seemed like a normal Tuesday. The sun was shining over Chicago. I put on my suit. The charcoal one Brenda always said made me look distinguished. I felt good. I felt powerful. My morning routine was simple. I'd drive to Roasted Beans, a coffee shop 3 blocks from our estate, grab a black coffee and a plain bagel, and read the Wall Street Journal. It was my time. The baristas knew me. Before I even pushed the glass door open, they knew exactly what I wanted. "Good morning, Mr. Coleman," the young girl at the counter said. Her name was Sarah, and she was always smiling. "The usual today?" "Yes, please, Sarah," I said, reaching for my wallet. I felt the familiar weight of the leather as I pulled out my American Express Platinum. It was a badge of hard work, a card with no preset spending limit. That card had paid for family trips to Europe, for Ryan's tuition at Yale, and for the diamond necklace Brenda wore at charity galas. I tapped the card against the reader and waited for the familiar beep. Instead, a harsh buzzer sounded. A red light flashed on the screen. Transaction declined. I frowned. "That's strange," I chuckled. "I must have demagnetized it. Try it one more time, please." Sarah looked a little embarrassed. She swiped it again. The buzzer sounded. Declined. "Mr. Coleman," she said, lowering her voice so the people behind me wouldn't hear, "it says the card has been deactivated." The line was growing. I could feel dozens of eyes on my back. A man in a rush let out a loud, impatient sigh. My face started to burn. I hadn't felt shame in decades. I am Harry Coleman. My bills are always paid early. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice tight. "Let me use my Visa." I pulled out my backup card, the one linked to our joint account. I inserted the chip. I stared at the screen. Processing. Processing. Then the dreaded red light again. Contact your bank. Card restricted. My hands started to shake. Not from age, but from the chill of a sudden adrenaline spike. This was impossible. Just yesterday, there was over $200,000 in that checking account. I'd checked it myself. "Sir, is everything okay?" Sarah asked, her voice full of sympathy. I hated that look. I didn't need sympathy. I wanted my coffee. I wanted my dignity. I fumbled in my pocket and found a $20 bill. Cash. Thank God for cash. "Keep the change," I muttered, grabbed my cup and walked out of the shop without looking back, my ears burning. I felt like a criminal, like a fraud. I sat in my car, a classic Mercedes I'd restored with my own hands. My grip on the steering wheel was so tight, my knuckles turned white. I called the bank. The automated voice sounded annoyingly cheerful. "I'm sorry, the access code you entered is invalid. Please contact the primary account holder." The primary account holder, that was me. It had always been me. I drove home. I didn't drive fast. I drove with a terrifying, calculated slowness. My mind was racing. Was it identity theft? Had hackers drained the accounts? But deep down, I knew no stranger did this. Strangers take the money and run. Strangers don't change access codes. Strangers don't place restrictions on cards. This was an inside job. I pulled into the driveway of the house I'd built with my own hands 20 years ago. It was a sprawling, beautiful, grand estate. Usually, looking at it filled me with pride. Today, it looked like a fortress keeping me out. I walked through the front door. The house was quiet. Too quiet. "Brenda!" I shouted. My voice echoed through the high-ceilinged foyer. No answer. I walked to my home office. The double oak doors were closed. I gripped the handles and pushed them open. The sight in front of me made me freeze. My son, Ryan, was sitting in my chair. He wasn't just sitting. He was leaning back, feet up on my desk, wearing one of the expensive Italian suits I'd bought him. He was twirling a pen between his fingers. It was my pen. Brenda sat on the leather sofa across from him, sipping iced tea. They looked like they were in the middle of a pleasant business meeting. They looked up as I entered, neither showing a hint of surprise. They had been ready for me. "What is going on?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. "I went for coffee, and my cards were declined, both of them. The bank said I'm not the primary account holder." Ryan took his feet off the desk, but didn't stand up. He gave me a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was a patronizing, condescending look. "Oh, that? Yeah. We were planning on telling you over dinner tonight, Dad. But I guess you found out early." "You were planning on telling me?" I repeated, stepping further into the room. "Telling me what? That you robbed me? That you hacked my accounts?" Brenda set her iced tea on a coaster. She smoothed her skirt and looked at me with a calm, almost bored expression. "Harry, don't be so dramatic. Nobody robbed you. We're just reorganizing the family finances. We had a meeting with the family lawyer this morning." I stared at her. "I hadn't met with any lawyer." "That's right," Ryan said. "We acted under the power of attorney you signed 5 years ago. Remember? When you had those heart issues, you signed a document giving us control if you were ever incapacitated or deemed unfit to manage complex assets." "I am not incapacitated," I roared. "I'm standing right here. I chaired a board meeting yesterday. I drove myself home. I am perfectly fine." Brenda sighed, as if dealing with a tantrum-throwing toddler. "Harry, just listen to yourself. You're shouting. You're turning red. This is exactly what we're talking about. You're getting older, and you're becoming increasingly emotional. We've noticed it for months. You're forgetful. You make impulsive decisions." "I am not forgetful," I snapped. Then Ryan stood up. He walked around the desk to face me. He was taller than me now, but he had never looked me in the eye like a real man before. He always looked away, but today he stared straight at me. "Dad, listen. We're doing this for your own good. The market is volatile. You're too conservative with investments. We want to protect the family legacy. We moved the liquid assets into a secure trust managed by Brenda and me. It's safer this way." "Safer?" I spat the word out. "You humiliated me in public. You cut me off from my own money." "It's not your money anymore, Harry," Brenda said softly. "It's family money, and you've squandered enough of it. Those donations to veterans' charities, the restoration costs for that old car. It's been draining us. We're just applying a tourniquet to the wound." I looked at my wife, then at my son. I saw the greed in their eyes. This wasn't about protecting assets, and it wasn't about my health. It was about control. They had planned this all along. That power of attorney was meant for a time when I might be in a coma or suffering a stroke, not for a Tuesday morning when I was perfectly healthy. "So what now?" I asked, forcing myself to remain calm. "How do I buy gas? How do I buy food?" Brenda reached into her purse. She pulled out a card. It was a generic prepaid debit card, the kind you buy at a pharmacy. She tossed it onto the desk. The card slid across the mahogany and stopped right by my hand. "There's $500 on it," she said. "That's your allowance for the week. It should be enough for your coffee and a simple lunch. If you need more, you can submit a request to Ryan, and we'll review it." I stared at the cheap plastic card. $500. Last year alone, I generated millions. Now I was being given an allowance like a child. "You can't do this," I said. "We already did," Ryan said, sitting back down in my chair. He looked comfortable. Too comfortable. "Now, Dad, why don't you go take a nap? You look tired. We have a lot of paperwork to get through." I stood there for a long time. My heart was pounding like a trapped bird against my ribs. I wanted to flip the desk. I wanted to grab Ryan by the collar and throw him out the window. I wanted to scream until the glass shattered, but I looked at them and I saw the smugness on their faces. They were waiting for me to explode. They wanted me to explode. If I used violence, if I started smashing things, they would call the police. They would have proof that I was mentally unstable. They would prove I was the crazy old man they claimed I was. I took a deep breath. I picked up the prepaid card. My fingers brushed the cold plastic. I looked at Brenda. "I won't forget this," I said calmly. She just smiled. That laugh, the one that told me she thought I was powerless. "Oh, Harry, you will, just like you forget to take your vitamins. Now get going." I turned and walked out of my office. I walked out of my house. I sat on the porch steps. The sun was still shining, but the world felt gray. They had my money. They had my company. They had stripped away my dignity. But as I sat there clutching that plastic card, a cold sense of resolve settled in my stomach. They thought they'd cut off the head of the lion. They thought I was a toothless beast, waiting to lay down and die. They were wrong. I looked at the card again. $500. Fine. I can work with $500. 40 years ago, I started with less than that. They want to play games. They want to see who is smarter, who is tougher. I tucked the card into my pocket. I wasn't going to take a nap. I walked to my car. I needed to make a phone call. But I couldn't use my phone. They probably monitored it. I needed a payphone or a burner phone if I could find one. I needed to call the one person Ryan and Brenda had forgotten, the person who knew where the bodies were buried, because he was the one who helped me dig the holes. This isn't the end. It's only the beginning. As I started the engine, I didn't feel like an old man anymore. I felt like a soldier returning to the trenches. They wanted a war. I'm going to give them a war. But they made one fatal mistake. They thought I told them everything. They thought they knew all the accounts, all the assets, all the companies. They couldn't have been more wrong. $500? I repeated. For an entire week? Yes, she said firmly. If you run out, you'll have to wait until next Tuesday for a refill. It'll teach you some discipline. Harry, you've been reckless lately. Buying those old car parts online, donating to that shelter without checking with us, that has to stop. I looked at the floor. I let them see a broken man. I let them see a defeated husband. I mumbled. I was just trying to fix the Mercedes. That Mercedes is a money pit, Ryan said, finally looking up. His eyes were cold. Maybe we should sell it. It takes up too much room in the garage, and I could use that spot for my new Porsche. My blood ran cold. That Mercedes was the first car I bought with money I earned myself. I had restored it bolt by bolt. It was my sanctuary. Please, I said, my voice trembling slightly, don't sell that car. It's the only thing I have left to tinker with. Brenda waved a dismissive hand. We'll see, Harry, if you behave. If you stick to your budget. Now, why don't you head upstairs? Ryan and I have a conference call with investors in 10 minutes. You need to clear out. Investors. My investors. Men and women I'd known for 30 years. People who had shaken my hand and looked me in the eye. Were they in on this too? Or had Ryan and Brenda spun a web of lies about my health? Did they tell everyone I was losing my mind? That I was unfit to manage things? I turned to leave. My feet felt heavy, like I was walking through wet concrete. I reached the door, my hand resting on the brass knob. I looked back at them. They had already forgotten I was there. Brenda was showing Ryan something on her tablet, and they were both laughing softly. They looked like co-conspirators celebrating a successful heist. And that was exactly what it was. A heist. Right in front of my face, they were stealing my life out from under me. I stepped into the hall and pulled the door shut. In that quiet house, the click of the latch sounded like a gunshot. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the scent of lemon polish and old wood. This house, which I had built to create a home, now felt like a prison, and I was the prisoner. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the debit card again. $500. They thought this was the leash holding me back. They thought this pocket money would make me stay in line. They thought that by taking my credit cards, they had taken my power. They were fools. They forgot I was self-made. They forgot I built an empire with guts and a pair of empty hands, not with a platinum card. I walked down the long hallway toward the kitchen. I needed to think. I needed a plan. The lie about taxes was full of holes. If they were really reorganizing for tax purposes, there would be documents for me to sign. There would be a notary. You can't take over someone's assets without a signature unless you forge it. A chill ran down my spine. Forgery. Ryan had been practicing my signature for years. When he was a teenager, he used to do it as a party trick. "Look, Dad, I can sign your checks," he'd say. We used to laugh about it. I wasn't laughing now. If they used power of attorney, they still needed medical proof that I was incapacitated. Where did they get that, unless they bought off a doctor? The scale of their betrayal began to emerge. This wasn't just greed. This was a conspiracy. They'd been planning this for months, maybe years. While I was working overtime to pay for their vacations, they were plotting how to kick me out. While I was teaching Ryan how to read a balance sheet, he was learning how to cook the books. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of tap water. I stared at my reflection in the granite countertop. I looked old. My hair was gray, my face lined with wrinkles. But my eyes were clear. My mind was sharp. They underestimated the most important part of me, my will. I took a sip of water. It had a metallic taste. "Don't spend it on cigars," Brenda had said. I wore a grim, tight smile. I wouldn't spend a single cent of this $500 on cigars. I was going to spend it on something much more dangerous. I was going to spend it on the truth. I needed to leave the house. I needed to get away from their prying eyes and suffocating lies. I checked my watch. It was only 11 a.m. I had time. I went out the back door, avoiding the garage where my Mercedes was parked. If I got near that car, Ryan might come out and start talking about selling it again. I might lose control. I walked down the driveway, past the manicured hedges and the stone fountain. I went out the front gate and onto the public sidewalk. I walked 3 blocks until I reached the bus stop. I hadn't taken a bus in 20 years. But Harry Coleman is a man who knows how to adapt. I sat on the wooden bench and waited. When the bus arrived, I used a few dollars of cash from my pocket. I didn't want to use that debit card yet. They might be tracking the transaction history. If I used that card, they'd know exactly where I was. I took the bus into the city, blending in with the crowd. Tired nurses, students with headphones, construction workers covered in dust. These were my people. This was where I came from. Ryan and Brenda lived in a bubble of country clubs and private jets. They had forgotten what the real world looked like. I hadn't. I got off near the financial district. I stood on the street corner, looking up at the skyscrapers that reached into the clouds. The truth was hidden in one of these buildings. I needed to figure out what legal maneuvering they'd use to lock me out. I needed to see if my name was still on the deeds, the titles, and the accounts. But I couldn't go to my usual lawyer. He was the family lawyer Brenda had mentioned. He was already bought and paid for. If I went to him, he'd call Ryan immediately. "Your dad is here. He's asking questions." No, I needed an outsider, someone who owed me a favor, someone who hated corruption as much as I did. I reached into my pocket and touched the debit card again. It was a symbol of their disrespect, but it was also my weapon. Because as long as they thought I was just scraping by on their handouts, they wouldn't be watching their backs. They thought I was beaten. They thought I was on my way to the park to feed pigeons. They had no idea I was marching toward war. I turned up my collar against the cold wind and started walking toward the old part of the city, to a dusty little law office belonging to a man named Peterson. He didn't have fancy digs. His office didn't have a view of the lake. But he was the best forensic accountant I knew, and he held a grudge against the big firms. As I walked, Brenda's voice played back in my head. For 1 week, I would make this $500 last for a week, and I would make them pay for every single cent of it. The lie they told me was a good one. It sounded reasonable. The details were rich, but it had one fatal flaw. They picked the wrong target. Taking the bus to the industrial park was a humiliation in itself, but I held my head high. I sat between a young mother struggling with a crying baby and a man who smelled of stale tobacco, clutching my prepaid debit card like a lifeline. When the bus finally hissed to a stop 2 blocks from Coleman Construction, my legs felt stiff, but my resolve was harder than the concrete beneath me. I walked the familiar path I'd driven in my truck 1,000 times, and later in my Mercedes. The building stood before me. a sturdy 3-story structure of brick and glass. Usually, seeing it filled me with a deep, quiet pride. It was the physical embodiment of 40 years of sweat and sacrifice. But today, when I looked up at the Coleman construction sign, I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. The sign was the same, but something about the place felt off. It felt hostile. I pushed through the glass double doors, expecting the familiar bell that announced visitors. Instead, there was dead silence. The warm oak reception desk I'd installed 20 years ago was gone. In its place was a cold white marble slab that looked more like a tombstone than a welcome desk. Sitting behind it was a young woman I'd never seen before. She was typing furiously on her phone, her long acrylic nails clicking against the screen. She didn't even look up when I walked in. "Excuse me," I tried to keep my voice authoritative. She held up a finger, finishing her text before slowly raising her eyes. She looked at me with a blank, uninterested expression. "Can I help you, sir? For deliveries, please go around to the back." "I'm not a delivery driver," I said, stepping closer. "I'm Harry Coleman. I own this company." She blinked, then typed something into her computer. "I don't see the name Harry Coleman in the employee directory," she said, her voice dripping with fake politeness. "Are you here to see someone specific? Do you have an appointment?" My blood began to boil. I built the walls she was sitting behind. I paid for the electricity running her computer, and she was asking me if I had an appointment. "I don't need an appointment to enter my own building," I said, raising my voice. "Where is Sarah? Where is the receptionist who worked here for 10 years? "Oh, Sarah was let go last week," the girl said, popping a piece of gum into her mouth. "Restructuring. My name is Tiffany. If you don't have an appointment, sir, I'm going to have to ask you to wait in the seating area while I call security." "Security? We never had security. We were a family business." I ignored her and walked past the desk, heading toward the hallway that led to the executive offices. "Sir, you can't go back there," Tiffany shrieked, scrambling to grab the phone. I strode down the hall. The walls used to be covered with photos of our projects: bridges, schools, hospitals. Now the walls were empty. The photos were gone, replaced by meaningless abstract art. It was as if they were erasing the history of this building. I needed to see Frank. Frank Miller had been my CFO for 30 years. He was the only person who knew the numbers better than I did. He was the company's moral compass. If anyone could explain what happened to the bank accounts, it was Frank. I reached the door at the end of the hall. The brass plaque that used to read Frank Miller, CFO, was gone. In its place was a post-it note that read, "Acting Financial Director." I pushed the door open without knocking. "Frank, we need to talk," I started. But the man sitting behind the desk wasn't Frank. He was young, maybe pushing 30, with slicked back hair and a suit that cost more than my first car. He was shredding documents. The shredder hummed loudly, devouring the paper he fed into it at a rapid pace. He jumped when I walked in, looking like a deer caught in the headlights. He quickly slapped a hand over a folder, covering what he was looking at. "Who are you?" I demanded, striding into the room. "Where is Frank?" The young man stood up, adjusting his tie. There was a nervous, weasel-like quality to him. "You must be Mr. Coleman," he said, forcing a smile. "I heard you might drop by. I'm Jason. Ryan hired me to modernize the accounts." "Modernize?" I spat the word out. "Where's Frank?" Jason cleared his throat, his eyes darting to the door. Mr. Miller decided to take early retirement, effective immediately. He wanted to spend more time with his grandchildren. "Liar!" I roared. "Frank doesn't have any grandchildren. His wife died 5 years ago, and this job was his life. He would never walk away in the middle of a fiscal quarter. What did you do to him?" I went around the desk. I wanted to see what was in the folder he was hiding. I wanted to see what he was shredding. "Sir, please, you can't be back here," Jason stammered, backing away. "These are confidential documents." "Confidential from whom?" I growled. "I'm the founder." I reached for the folder. Jason tried to block me, but he was too weak. I pushed him aside and grabbed the folder. Before I could open it, the door behind me swung open. "Dad, what the hell are you doing?" It was Ryan. He stood in the doorway, red-faced with anger. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. He looked stressed, his hair a bit messy. Behind him stood 2 security guards I didn't recognize. I held the folder and turned to face my son. "Where is Frank, Ryan? Why is this kid sitting in his office? Why is he shredding documents? Ryan walked into the room and snatched the folder from my hands. He threw it back on the desk. Frank is old, Dad, just like you. He couldn't keep up with the new software. He was always making mistakes. We gave him a generous severance package and sent him to Florida. It was time for fresh blood. Jason here is a wizard with international tax law. Fresh blood, I said, looking at Jason, who was now safely hiding behind Ryan and smirking. You mean a yes man? Someone who doesn't ask questions? Frank would never have allowed you to freeze my cards. Frank would never have let you transfer assets without my signature. Ryan sighed and ran a hand through his hair. This is why you can't come here anymore, Dad. You're getting paranoid. You're shouting at employees. You're disrupting the workflow. Look at Jason. He's terrified of you. I looked at Jason. He didn't look terrified at all. He looked guilty. I want to see the books, Ryan, I said, lowering my voice. I want to see the ledgers for the last 6 months. If everything is above board, then show me. Ryan laughed. It was a cruel, dismissive sound. You wouldn't understand them, Dad. It's all digitized now. Everything is in the cloud. You have trouble even checking your email. Go home. Go enjoy your retirement. Stop trying to micromanage a world you no longer belong to. I'm not going anywhere until I get answers. I stood my ground, firm as a rock. Ryan nodded to the security guards. Please escort Mr. Coleman to the exit and make sure he doesn't take anything with him. The 2 guards stepped forward. They were huge, their uniforms straining across their chests. They looked at me with no respect, as if I were just a nuisance that needed to be removed. Mr. Coleman, please come with us, one of them said, reaching for my arm. Don't touch me, I snapped, shaking him off. I looked at Ryan. He was checking his watch, as if kicking his own father out of the building was just another item on his to-do list. You're making a mistake, Ryan, I said, a very big mistake. Ryan didn't even look up. Goodbye, Dad. Take the bus home, get some exercise. I walked out of the office, flanked by the 2 guards like a criminal, being transferred to a cell. We walked past the open doors of other offices. Those employees, the people I hired, the people whose families I knew, looked up, then quickly looked away. They were afraid. They saw what was happening. If even the founder could be dragged out, then none of them were safe. We reached the lobby. Tiffany, the receptionist, watched with a smug smirk as the guards opened the glass door for me. Have a wonderful day, sir, she called out, her voice full of sarcasm. I stumbled out onto the sidewalk. The heat of the afternoon sun hit me, but I felt a coldness inside. The door clicked shut behind me, locking automatically. I stood there staring at the glass. I could see my own reflection. I looked disheveled. My tie was crooked. I looked like a crazy old man who was looking for trouble. But as I straightened my tie and smoothed my jacket, my brain was racing. Frank didn't retire. Frank was forced out. You don't fire a loyal CFO unless he refuses to do something illegal. And you don't hire a nervous kid who spends all day shredding documents unless you have something to hide. Ryan said I was disrupting the employees. He said I was interfering with the workflow. He was right. I was disrupting their plan. I left the building not to head toward the bus stop, but toward a small diner nearby, the place Frank used to eat lunch every Tuesday. If he really went to Florida, he wouldn't be there. But if he was afraid, if he was hiding, he might be nearby. Ryan thought he won this round. He thought that by kicking me out, he could blind me. But he did the exact opposite. He confirmed everything. The locked doors, the new employees, the shredders. It all pointed to one thing. They weren't just stealing my money. They were using my company to commit crimes. I felt the debit card in my pocket. I was kicked out of my own castle, but I wasn't out of the fight. I needed to find Frank. If I found him, I knew he would tell me something. The rot went deep, and I was the only one who could cut it out. When I got home from the diner, the sun had set, casting long, jagged shadows across the lawn I'd mowed myself every weekend. I walked into the house, the earlier silence replaced by the clatter of silverware and the hum of conversation. Dinner had started. In the past, this was my favorite time of the day. The noise from the construction sites faded, and I could simply be a husband and a father. But as I walked into the dining room, I realized that life was gone forever. I was walking into a shark tank. My mother-in-law, Agnes, was sitting at the head of the long table, my seat. She was 80, a woman who had never worked a day in her life, yet had strong opinions, on how others should work. She wore a silk blouse that I knew cost more than my first car. Her fingers were covered in rings, her hair styled perfectly. Seeing me enter, she didn't smile. She just raised a painted eyebrow, looking at me like a waiter who'd served the wrong dish. "You're late, Harry," she said, her voice sharp and piercing. "We didn't wait for you. The soup is cold." I looked around. Brenda was there, sipping wine. Ryan was there, scrolling on his phone. Nobody looked up. My place setting was on the table, but it was squeezed between a side cabinet and a large vase. They had physically moved me from the head of the long table. The symbolism was unmistakable. I sat down. The chair was different, too. It was one of the spare folding chairs we used for large parties, not my high-backed leather chair. I looked at my plate, a small, dry piece of chicken and some wilted salad. Then I looked at the center of the table. A bottle of wine was breathing in a crystal decanter. I recognized the label instantly. It was a Chateau Margaux, a vintage I'd specifically saved for our 50th anniversary, a $2,000 bottle of wine. I watched Brenda pour a full glass for Agnes. The deep red liquid swirled in the crystal glass. "Looks like we're celebrating," I said, unfolding my napkin. Agnes took a sip, closing her eyes dramatically. "Not bad." She smacked her lips. "A little oaky, but it'll do. Brenda, dear, pass the bread." I felt the vein in my temple throbbing. "Not bad?" She was drinking liquid gold and calling it not bad. I looked at Brenda. "I thought we were being budget conscious." I tried to keep my voice steady. "You gave me a prepaid card, $500 a week. You told me not to buy cigars. And yet you're drinking a $2,000 bottle of wine on a Tuesday night." Brenda sighed, setting her glass down with a sharp clink. "Oh, Harry, stop looking for trouble. Agnes is a guest. We can't serve her boxed wine. Besides, the wine was already in the cellar. We didn't spend money on it. It's inventory." "Inventory," I repeated. "That's my collection. That's our family collection." Ryan chimed in, his mouth full of potatoes. "Don't be so possessive, Dad. It's ugly." Agnes let out a short, harsh laugh. "Possessive? Funny coming from you, Harry." She turned her cold, watery eyes toward me. "You know, you should be thanking Brenda. She's saving you from bankruptcy. But all you do is complain. You walk in late, looking like a vagrant, and immediately start nickel and diming. This is classic lower-class behavior." I gripped my fork tightly. I paid for Agnes's hip surgery. I paid for her condo in Florida. When her late husband left nothing but gambling debts, I paid for his funeral. And now I was lower class. "I'm just asking for consistency, Agnes," I said, forcing myself to eat a bite of the dried chicken. "If I'm being treated like a child on an allowance, I'd hope everyone else in the house could tighten their belts." The table went quiet. Agnes slowly set her fork down. She looked at Brenda, then at Ryan, and finally she locked her gaze onto me. It was a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. "Tighten our belts?" she scoffed. "Harry, look at yourself. You're old. You're useless. You can't bring anything to this family anymore. You don't manage the company. Ryan does. You don't manage the house. Brenda does. You're just a mouth waiting to be fed." She took another sip of my wine, swishing it around in her mouth before swallowing. "You should know your place, Harry," she continued, her voice filled with poison. "In the wild, old lions are left to starve. We're kind enough to keep you in the house, but don't mistake our charity for equality. You're just a guest here now, and a very expensive guest at that." I looked at Brenda. I waited for her to defend me. I waited for her to say, "Mom, stop it. Harry worked 40 years to afford this food." I waited for Ryan to say, "Grandma, that's too much. He's my father." But nobody said a word. Brenda looked down at her plate with a faint, thin smile on her lips, as if she enjoyed seeing me beaten into the ground. Ryan just shook his head with a smug chuckle, as if agreeing with every word Agnes said. "Actually," Agnes leaned forward, her eyes gleaming, "you're not even a guest. Guests are invited. You're more like a freeloader." That's right, that's the word. A freeloader living off the success of his wife and son. Freeloader. The word hovered in the air like a stench. Brenda covered her mouth to hide a laugh. Ryan laughed without restraint. "Freeloader," he repeated. "Good word, Grandma. This old man is a freeloader." They all laughed, the three of them, sitting in the house I built, eating the food I bought, drinking my private collection, and mocking me. They were mocking the man whose calloused hands paid for every spoon on that table. Something broke inside me. But it wasn't my heart. It was the last chain of loyalty I had to these people. If I had any doubts before, if I had any fantasies that this was just a misunderstanding or a moment of madness, those fantasies were dead. You don't call the person providing for you a freeloader unless you've completely lost your soul. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. As much as the urge was strong, I didn't splash the wine in Agnes's face. Instead, I carefully placed my knife and fork on my plate. I wiped my mouth with my linen napkin. I looked at them, really looked at them. They were ugly. Maybe not physically, but their souls were twisted. They were vultures pecking at the flesh of the living, thinking it was a corpse. "You're right, Agnes," I said softly. The laughter died down, replaced by a confused silence. They expected me to fight back, to shout. My calmness unsettled them. "I'm right?" Agnes asked, narrowing her eyes. "Yes," I said. "I have been coasting. I've put too much of a burden on Ryan and Brenda. Maybe I have gotten too comfortable. I think I should be grateful that you're all willing to manage my complicated wealth while I just sit here." Brenda relaxed her shoulders. She thought I'd given in. She thought I'd accepted defeat. "Well, I'm glad you finally see it that way, Harry," she said, pouring herself more wine. "We just want what's best for everyone." I stood up. I picked up my plate. "Where are you going?" Ryan asked. "I'm going to put my plate in the dishwasher," I said, just like a good little freeloader should. I wouldn't want to add to the maid's workload. I walked into the kitchen. As the swinging door closed behind me, I heard them start talking again. Their voices were light, happy. They were discussing a trip to Italy in the fall. They were squandering the money they thought that they already had. I stood at the sink staring at the dirty dishes. The reflection in the dark window was watching me too. I looked tired, yes, but I also looked dangerous. Agnes called me an old lion left to starve. She forgot one thing. Old lions are the most dangerous because they have nothing left to lose, and they know how to hunt in the dark. I washed the plate, dried it, put it away. Freeloader. I repeated the word in my head. I was going to carve it into my brain. I was going to use it as fuel. In the days to come, whenever I felt tired, whenever I wanted to quit, I would remember Agnes's face and that word. I walked through the dining room without looking at them. "Good night," I said. "Good night, Harry." Agnes dismissed me casually, not even turning her head. "Try to wake up earlier tomorrow. Sleeping in is a privilege for people who work." I went upstairs to the guest room I'd been sleeping in for the last month, because Brenda said my snoring bothered her. I closed the door and locked it. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out the prepaid debit card. $500. Then I reached into my inner jacket pocket. I pulled out a crumpled note I'd picked up from the trash can at the diner near the office. It was a phone number. Frank's sister's number. I'd remembered it from a Christmas card years ago. It was a long shot, but it was my only hope. They called me a freeloader. They thought I was defenseless. Tomorrow I would show them what a freeloader could do. I would show them that while they were drinking my wine, I was sharpening my knife. Dinner was over. The game had only just begun. And unlike them, I wasn't fighting for money. I was fighting for my life. The house was quiet. A rare, heavy silence that felt like the calm before a storm. Brenda had gone to her weekly spa for a $300 facial, which she claimed was essential for stress relief, paid for, no doubt, with money from the accounts I could no longer access. Ryan had left an hour ago, his Porsche tires squealing as he pulled out of the driveway, likely for a lunch meeting where he would pretend to be the genius brain behind Coleman Construction. Agnes was in her upstairs suite. Her heavy, snoring breaths drifted down the stairs. I stood in the hall and listened. The grandfather clock I'd bought in Germany 30 years ago ticked rhythmically. Tick, tock. It was counting down the time I had left to save my own life. I knew I had a window of about 2 hours. It wasn't much, but for a man used to building skyscrapers on tight deadlines, it was enough. I walked to the double oak doors of my home office. My office? I corrected myself in my head. According to them, this was now Ryan's office. He'd even installed a new digital lock on the handle, a high-tech gizmo that emitted a soft blue glow. He thought he was clever. He thought a battery-operated toy could keep me out. He forgot I was a builder. He forgot I knew exactly how those door frames were constructed, because I'd installed the frame with my own hands. I ignored the keypad. I went to the garage and grabbed a thin flathead screwdriver and a small pry bar. I returned to the door. I wedged the screwdriver into the gap between the door frame and the latch mechanism. I pressed hard, feeling the wood give slightly. I knew exactly where the weakest point was. With a firm shove, I pried the latch mechanism open. The door groaned and swung open. I walked inside. The smell of the room had changed. It used to smell of old paper and leather. Now it smelled of Ryan's sharp cologne and energy drinks left out overnight. I walked to the desk, my mahogany desk. It was cluttered with papers, but I knew the real secrets wouldn't be left out. In the open, I tried the drawers. Locked. Of course. I looked at the top drawer. That had always been where I kept the sensitive contracts. I jammed the pry bar under the edge of the drawer. I didn't care about the varnish anymore. I didn't care about protecting the finish. The furniture, the house. It was just wood and stone now. My legacy was the only thing that mattered. I pushed down hard on the pry bar. With a loud snap, the wood splintered and the lock gave way. I pulled the drawer open. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from fear, but from anticipation. I started flipping through the files. At first, it looked like standard business paperwork. Invoices, payroll. But then, tucked at the very back, under a stack of old blueprints, I found a thick manila envelope. It wasn't labeled. I opened it. The first document made my blood run cold. It was a draft of a reverse mortgage for the estate. Not a small loan, but a full leverage of the property's entire equity. They were cashing out the value I had intended to leave to my grandchildren, should I ever have them. I flipped to the next page. It was accompanied by a schedule. The closing date was set for next week. I kept reading. My hands started to shake, and I had to lay the documents flat on the desk to steady them. The next document was a letter from a law firm I'd never heard of. The letterhead showed it was based in Panama. Subject: asset liquidation and offshore transfer. I read the words, but my brain refused to process them at first. It was so evil, so calculated. The letter outlined a plan to sell off Coleman Construction's heavy machinery, the cranes, the bulldozers, the trucks, to a shell company for pennies on the dollar. That shell company was registered in the Cayman Islands, and the sole beneficiary of that shell company wasn't the Coleman Family Trust. It was Ryan Coleman. They were gutting the company. They were dismantling it like thieves stripping a stolen car in a chop shop. They had no intention of running the business. They knew they were incompetent. They knew they couldn't land the big contracts. So they decided to sell off everything I'd built, stash the cash in offshore accounts, and let the company file for bankruptcy here in the States. I felt nauseated. This wasn't just theft. This was murder. They were murdering my reputation. They were murdering the livelihoods of the 200 people who worked for me. And while they were doing all this, I was sitting in the next room, eating dry chicken, worrying about a $500 allowance. But the worst was yet to come. At the bottom of the envelope, I found a crumpled email printout. It was correspondence between Ryan and a doctor whose name I recognized, a psychiatrist notorious for being bought. The email read, "The evaluation is scheduled for the 25th. Once you sign the declaration of competency stating Harry is suffering from advanced dementia, we can expedite the power of attorney into full guardianship. We found a facility in state that accepts government-subsidized patients. It fits our budget, and it will help with our cash flow issues." I stared at the paper. A facility that fit their budget. Government-subsidized. They weren't just stealing my money. They were dumping me in a warehouse for the forgotten. They intended to lock me in that hellhole, sedated and drooling, while they used my life's work to pay for margaritas on Caribbean beaches. I felt tears sting my eyes. Hot, angry tears. I'd changed Ryan's diapers. I'd taught him to ride a bike. I'd paid for his mistakes, bailed him out of trouble, and given him a seat at the board table. And this was his repayment. A cheap nursing home and a shallow grave. I wiped the tears away. There was no time for grief now. Grief was a luxury for people who were safe. I was in a war zone. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the cheap smartphone I'd bought for cash at the convenience store yesterday. I'd hidden it in my sock drawer. I opened the camera. My hands were steady now. The anger had crystallized into something as hard and cold as a diamond. Click. I captured the mortgage draft. Click. I captured the Panama documents. Click. I captured the email about the nursing home. I photographed every single page. I made sure the dates and signatures were clearly visible. I documented the proof of their betrayal in high definition. Just as I was about to put the papers back, I saw something else in the trash can by the desk. It was a crumpled, glossy brochure. I smoothed it out. It was a brochure for a luxury yacht. The price was circled in red, $12 million. Written in Ryan's handwriting next to it were the words, Freedom, ETA, 30 days. 30 days. That was their timeline. That was how much time I had left before they pulled the trigger on the bankruptcy and sent me to the asylum. I carefully tucked the documents back into the envelope. I put it back in the drawer, exactly where I found it. I pushed the drawer shut. If they looked closely, the broken lock would be obvious. But I gambled that Ryan was too lazy to check. He was arrogant. He thought I'd completely surrendered. He could never imagine this freeloader conducting a forensic investigation in his own office. I pushed the chair back and stood up. I took one last look at the room. It didn't feel like my office anymore. It felt like a crime scene. In a way, it was. They'd already killed the version of me that used to be a father and a husband. I walked out of the office and pulled the door shut. I used the screwdriver to click the latch back into a semi-locked position. Not perfect, but it would hold. I returned to the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water. My throat was as dry as dust. I looked out the window at the wide lawn. I saw the swing set I'd built for Ryan when he was 5. It was rusty now, overgrown with vines. They wanted to send me to a home. They wanted to declare me incompetent. I took a sip of water. I checked the time. Brenda would be back in 20 minutes. I needed to be sitting in the living room with the newspaper, looking exactly like the confused, compliant old man they wanted. I went to the living room and sat in my armchair. I opened the newspaper, but I didn't see the words. My mind was already 3 steps ahead. They had a plan, a 30-day plan. Well, I had a plan too, and my plan didn't end with me in a nursing home. My plan ended with them in a jail cell. I touched the burner phone in my pocket. It felt heavy, like a loaded gun. I had the evidence. Now I needed the executioner. I needed Peterson. I needed to get these photos to him today. The sound of the garage door opening rumbled up through the floor. Brenda was home. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes, pretending to sleep. But beneath my eyelids, I was wide awake. The lion wasn't sleeping. The lion was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And when I struck, I would make sure they never saw it coming. The rules of the game had changed. They were playing for money. I was playing for justice. And justice, I decided, had to be served cold. I waited until the house fell into a heavy afternoon stillness. Brenda was upstairs, likely with cucumber slices over her eyes, and the staff was on break. I slipped out the side door, the one near the pantry that squeaked, if you didn't lift the handle just right. I knew every quirk of this house because I'd paid for every beam and every brick. I walked down the long driveway, past the manicured hedges Ryan claimed were too expensive to maintain, and out onto the main road. I didn't take my Mercedes. I didn't call a cab. I walked to the bus stop again. The ride into the city was long, but it gave me time to steady my nerves. I sat in the back, watching the city skyline grow closer. Ryan and Brenda thought my world stopped at the gates of our estate. They thought my power ended at the bank accounts they'd frozen. They were about to learn a very painful lesson about the difference between being rich and being wealthy. Being rich is having a platinum card. Being wealthy is owning the bank that issued it. I got off the bus in the financial district, but I didn't head toward the gleaming glass tower where Coleman Construction was housed. That building, with its chrome lobby and rude receptionist, was just a facade. It was the public face of my business, the part I let the world see. It was the part I'd let Ryan play with. I walked 2 blocks east, to a building most people wouldn't look at twice. It was a pre-war structure of limestone and granite, with small windows and a heavy iron door. There was no sign outside, no logo, just a small, polished brass plaque, 440. I pushed open the heavy door and walked into the lobby. It was cool inside, and it smelled of old money, leather, beeswax, and silence. No pop music was playing. No gum-chewing teenager sat behind the front desk. A large man in a dark suit stood by the elevator. He saw me and straightened up instantly. He didn't ask to see identification. He didn't ask if I had an appointment. He just nodded, a deep, heartfelt sign of respect. "Good afternoon, Mr. Coleman," he murmured. "A pleasure to see you, sir." "Good afternoon, James," I replied. "Is Peterson upstairs?" "He's waiting in the boardroom, sir. The private elevator is ready for you." James pressed the button for me. As the doors closed, cutting the world away, I felt my shoulders relax for the first time in 2 days. In my own house, I was a freeloader. In my son's office, I was an annoying old man. But here in the heart of the beast, I was the king. The elevator opened directly into a penthouse office that occupied the entire top floor. This was the headquarters of H.C. Holdings, my true company, an entity no one in my family knew existed. Peterson was standing by the window, looking out over the city. He turned when I walked in. He was a man of my own generation with a razor-sharp mind and a suit that cost more than Ryan's Porsche. He didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me with the focused, intense gaze of a general waiting for orders. "Harry," he said, walking over to shake my hand firmly, "I got your message. You look like hell." "They cut my carts," I said, walking over to the massive oak conference table. "Peterson, they've set me up with a $500 allowance per week, and they have a plan to put me in a state-run nursing home within 30 days. Peterson's expression darkened. Without a word, he walked to the sideboard and poured 2 scotches. He slid one across the table to me. "Drink," he said. "You're going to need it." I took a sip. It burned pleasantly, waking up my senses. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the cheap burner phone. I pushed it across the table. "The evidence is all on there," I said. "Photos of the mortgage draft, the Panama offshore accounts, and the emails with that corrupt psychiatrist. They're gutting Coleman Construction. They're selling off the equipment and moving the money into Ryan's shell companies." Peterson picked up the phone, swiping through the pictures. His eyebrows rose. "They were sloppy," he muttered. "Greedy and sloppy. They didn't even bother using encrypted email. They're treating this like a smash and grab." He put the phone down and looked at me. "So they think they're stealing the company," he said. "They think they're stealing everything," I corrected him. "The house, the cars, the business. They think they won." Peterson smiled. It was a shark-like smile. He walked over to a large cloth-covered easel in the corner of the room and ripped the cloth off. Beneath it was a complex organizational chart. "It's time to remind you of what you really own, Harry, because I suspect in your benevolence you may have forgotten how well we've protected you." He pointed to a small box at the bottom of the chart. It was labeled Coleman Construction LLC. "This is what Ryan is fighting for," Peterson said. "This is the Bridge and Road Company. It has about $30 million in assets. It's a nice little business indeed." He paused, then moved the pointer to a large box at the top of the chart that had dozens of lines stretching out from it. "And this," Peterson said, his voice dropping an octave, "is H.C. Holdings." I looked at the chart. I knew it, of course. I designed it. But seeing it laid out like that gave me a new sense of clarity. H.C. Holdings, Peterson continued, is the parent company. It owns 100% of the shares of Coleman Construction, but it also owns the land the Coleman Construction office building sits on. It owns the leasing company, and that leasing company holds the title to every crane and bulldozer Ryan is trying to sell. He tapped the chart again. "And the house, Harry. The estate. Who holds the deed to the estate?" "H.C. Holdings," I said softly. "Correct," Peterson said. "You transferred the deed 10 years ago for liability protection. You and Brenda are legally just tenants. You pay 0 rent, but you don't own those bricks. H.C. Holdings does." "And the cars?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "Company vehicles," Peterson said. "Leased by H.C. Holdings to Coleman Construction." He sat across from me, leaning forward. "Do you understand what this means, Harry? Ryan and Brenda are trying to sell assets they don't own. They're trying to mortgage a house they're renting. They're trying to sell trucks that belong to a leasing company. They aren't criminal masterminds. They're just spoiled children who thought that because they were sitting at the school desk, the furniture belonged to them." I looked at the chart. My empire, $500 million in real estate, intellectual property, and diversified investments. Coleman Construction, the company Ryan would have killed me for, was just a drop in the bucket. Maybe 5% of my net worth. They have no idea, I said. How could they? Peterson replied. You never told them. You wanted them to develop character on their own. You wanted Ryan to work at the construction company and appreciate the value of every dollar. You never told him the construction company was just training wheels. I felt a heavy sadness spread through my chest. I had tested them. I'd given them a little bit of power to see what they would do with it. Instead of growing, they'd turned into monsters. I'd hoped that one day I could bring Ryan into this office and show him everything he was truly going to inherit. I wanted to see his eyes light up. I wanted to say, Son, all of this is yours. But now that would never happen. So, Peterson broke the silence, the situation we have now is that the subsidiary management, your wife and son, are committing massive commercial fraud and theft against the parent company. Yes, I said, and since you are the sole shareholder of HC Holdings, they are directly stealing your money. But the way they've gone about it leaves them wide open to federal charges. Wire fraud, bank fraud, conspiracy. Peterson opened a folder on the table. I took the liberty of preparing 2 paths, Harry, he said. Path A is the gentle route. We reveal the corporate structure. We show them they own nothing. We fire them, cut off their financial supply, and force them to get real jobs. No jail time, just poverty. He stared at me intently. And Path B? Path B is the nuclear option, Peterson said. We let them keep going. We let them try to sell the equipment. We let them sign those mortgage papers. We let them lock in their crimes. Then, once the ink is dry, we bring the hammer down. We bring in forensic auditors. We call the FBI. We charge them with grand larceny and corporate espionage. We strip them of everything, and we send them to prison. I stared at the amber liquid in my glass. I thought back to dinner last night. I thought of Agnes calling me a freeloader. I thought of Brenda making me ask for lunch money. I thought of the nursing home brochure in Ryan's trash can. They weren't planning on showing me any mercy. They were planning to lock me away until I drew my last breath. They were willing to erase my entire existence just to get their hands on my money. I looked up at Peterson. How much longer until they finish the final deal on the equipment? I asked. According to the emails you found, the buyer in the Caymans is waiting for the contracts. 3 days, Peterson said. 3 days, I repeated. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked down over the city. Somewhere down there, Ryan was probably bragging to his friends about how he'd finally taken control. Peterson, I said, my voice steady. Yes, Harry? Prepare Path B, I said. But I want to add a twist. I want to catch them myself. When the handcuffs go on, I want to be looking them in the eye. Peterson nodded slowly. He picked up his pen. We'll need to run a forensic audit on the Coleman Construction servers, he said. We need to track every penny they've moved in the last 6 months. Can you get us access? I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I'd felt in days. I hired the IT director for Coleman Construction 15 years ago, I said. He thinks I'm a dinosaur who doesn't know how to use a mouse, but I paid for his daughter's leukemia treatments out of my own pocket. His loyalty is to me, not to Ryan. Then we have everything we need, Peterson said. I finished my scotch. I felt empowered. I was ready. I need to go back to the house, I said. I have to play the part of the confused old man for a few more days. I need them to think they're about to win. Be careful, Harry, Peterson warned. A cornered animal is dangerous. I put the burner phone back in my pocket. They aren't animals, Peterson, I said as I turned toward the elevator. They're parasites, and I've just found the cure. The machine was already in motion. The gears were turning. The trap was set. They wanted to treat me like a child. They wanted to push me into a corner. Well, they were about to find out that nobody pushes Harry Coleman into a corner and gets away with it. I rode the elevator down and stepped back out onto the street. The sun was still shining, but for my family, a long, cold winter was just beginning. They wanted money. They wanted power. Well, they were about to taste the full weight of it crashing down on their heads. I sat in my real office, the one my family didn't even know existed, in the luxurious leather chair. The city skyline stretched out before me, a testament to what focus and discipline can build. But my mind wasn't on the view. It was entirely on the betrayal happening in my own home. Peterson, my attorney and oldest friend, sat across from me with a grim expression. He'd just laid out the legal framework for our next moves. It was ruthless, but it was necessary. You know, Peterson, I said quietly, this whole thing, handing them control of Coleman Construction, it was never because I wanted to retire. Peterson nodded slowly. It was a test, a loyalty test, I answered. I wanted to see if they could handle a little power without losing their souls. I wanted to see if Ryan had the integrity to manage a business that supported 200 families. I wanted to see if Brenda could be a partner and not just a spendthrift. I took a deep breath. The air in the room felt heavy. They failed, Peterson. They failed so spectacularly, it's breathtaking. I gave them a $30 million company, a goose that laid golden eggs, and their first instinct wasn't to feed it. It was to kill it and sell the meat. Peterson leaned forward, his hands clasped over the polished oak table. It's worse than failure, Harry. It's criminal negligence. And now, with the exposure of this offshore scheme, it's blatant fraud. If we don't stop them, they won't just bankrupt the company. They'll take you down with them. I know, I said. That's why we're done playing games. I picked up the phone on the desk. It was a secure line. I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. After 2 rings, a crisp, professional voice answered. Sterling Security, the voice said. This is Harry Coleman, I said. Verification code Alpha 709ER. The person on the other end paused, and their tone shifted immediately. Mr. Coleman, how can we be of service, sir? I need Ghost Team, I said. Tonight. Target is the Coleman Construction servers. Full forensic audit. I want every email, every transaction, every deleted file from the last 6 months. And I need you to do it without triggering a single internal alarm. Understood, sir. Our team will be inside the system within the hour. Do we have authorization to burn through the CFO's firewalls? If necessary, burn them to the ground, I said. Just get me the evidence. I want to know where every cent went. I want to know who signed the checks. I want to know who authorized the equipment transfers. Consider it done. I hung up the phone. Peterson looked at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. You've unleashed the hounds, he said. They aren't hounds, Peterson, I said, standing up and walking to the window. They're surgeons. They're going to excise the tumor that's infected my company. Ryan thinks he's clever because he hired some kid to shred paper. He doesn't realize that digital footprints never disappear. He thinks he can hide money in the Caymans. He doesn't know that my people can find a single coin in the middle of a desert. I turned to face him. This is the heartbreaking part, Peterson. Ryan is my son. I changed his diapers. I taught him how to throw a baseball. When he messed up as a teenager, I was the one who cleaned it up. I kept hoping that one day he'd grow up. I kept hoping he'd finally become a real man. Peterson poured me a little more scotch. Some men never grow up, Harry. They just get older and more expensive. I took the glass but didn't drink. I stared at the amber liquid. I remember when he was 10, I said softly. He stole a candy bar from the corner store. I forced him to go back, return it, and apologize to the owner. He cried. He said he was sorry. I thought he'd learned the lesson about not taking what wasn't his. I swirled the glass. Now, he's trying to steal a $30 million company, and he doesn't have a shred of remorse. Just greed. And Brenda, she's no victim in this. She's the architect. She's the one pulling the strings. She's the one who wanted the luxury life without the work. I set the glass down with a sharp clack. Enough nostalgia. We have work to do. Peterson opened his laptop. The audit team will need about 24 hours to build a complete case, he said. They'll map the flow of funds. They'll identify the shell companies. They'll match the timestamps of the transfers with Ryan's login activity. By tomorrow night, we'll have a file that will put them away for 20 years. Good, I said. But I need more than financial records. I need proof of the conspiracy. I need to link them to that doctor. I need to prove they plan to declare me incompetent. The team will scrape their private emails too, Peterson said. If they use company equipment or company Wi-Fi, we'll find it. I nodded. A cold sense of resolve settled over me. The sadness was fading, replaced by that familiar, rock-steady clarity that comes when you're facing a job that has to be done. "What about the bank?" I asked. "I've drafted the letters," Peterson said. "The moment you give the signal, we'll freeze the Coleman construction assets. We'll warn the lenders that those mortgage applications are fraudulent. We'll notify the authorities in the Caymans that the incoming funds are proceeds of crime." "Not yet," I said. "Wait until the audit is complete. I want them to feel safe for a few more days. I want them to sign the final documents. I want them to complete the crime." Peterson raised an eyebrow. "That's dangerous, Harry. If they move the money fast enough—" "They won't," I interrupted. "They're arrogant. They think I'm a confused old man who only cares about his lunch money. They think you're out of the picture. They think they have all the time in the world." I walked over to the organizational chart Peterson had shown me earlier. I traced the line from HC Holdings down to Coleman Construction. "I built this," I said. "I built it with blood and sweat. I'm not letting them tear it down for a quick payday." I looked at Peterson. "When this is all over, Peterson, I'm making changes. Big changes." "What kind of changes?" he asked. "I'm going to find people who actually care about the company," I said. "People like Frank. I'm going to bring him back, and I'm going to look for young people who are hungry to build something real, not people who are just waiting to inherit it." Peterson smiled. "Sounds like a good plan, Harry." I checked my watch. I had to get back to the house. I had to go back and play the confused, failing old man. I had to sit at that dinner table and listen to their lies. I had to watch them squander my money and insult my intelligence. It would be the hardest performance of my life. I grabbed my coat. "Peterson," I said at the door, "make sure the audit team checks the jewelry purchase records." "Jewelry?" Peterson asked. "Yes," I said. "Brenda's been wearing a new diamond bracelet lately, and I saw Megan, my daughter-in-law, wearing a new watch. I have a feeling those weren't paid for with their own savings." "I'll add it to the list," Peterson said. I walked out of the office and into the private elevator. As the doors closed, I felt a strange sense of calm. The machine was in motion. The gears were turning. The trap was set. They wanted to treat me like a child. They wanted to push me into a corner. Well, they were about to find out that nobody pushes Harry Coleman into a corner. I stepped into the lobby and nodded to James, the security guard. "Have a pleasant evening, Mr. Coleman," he said. "I will, James," I said. "I certainly will." I stepped out into the cool night air. The city lights were coming on. It was beautiful. I took the bus back to the suburbs. I sat in the back again. I watched the people around me, ordinary people, honest people, people who worked hard for their money. I felt more kinship with them than I did with my own family. After I got off the bus, I walked the final mile to the estate. My legs were tired, but my spirit was soaring. I walked up the driveway. The house was lit up like a Christmas tree. I could see shadows moving in the dining room. They were probably opening another bottle of my best wine. They were probably toasting their success. I entered the house through the side door. I could hear their laughter. It sounded sharp and hollow. I walked into the kitchen. Marco, the chef, a good man, was preparing dessert. He looked at me with sad eyes. "Mr. Coleman," he whispered, "would you like some dinner? I saved you a plate of roast beef before they finished." "Thank you, Marco," I said, patting his shoulder. "You're a good man." I took the plate. I didn't go into the dining room. I took the back stairs up to my room. I sat on my bed and ate the cold roast beef. It tasted wonderful. My phone buzzed. A text from Peterson. "Team is inside. Data extraction in progress. It's even worse than we thought." I smiled. Let it be worse, I thought. The worse it is, the harder they'll fall. I finished dinner and leaned back against my pillows. I closed my eyes. I could hear Ryan's voice downstairs, loud and arrogant. "To the future!" he shouted. I whispered to the dark, "Yes, son, to the future. To a future without you and entirely mine." The scratch of my fountain pen across the heavy security paper was the only sound in the room. It was a rhythmic, unhurried sound, like the sharpening of a blade. I sat in a private meeting room at the bank. The floors were marble, and the ceilings were high enough to make a man feel small. But I didn't feel small today. I felt invincible. Sitting across from me was Mr. Sterling, the senior vice president of commercial lending. He'd known me for 30 years. He was a man who knew exactly where the bodies were buried because he'd financed the shovels. He watched me sign the final document with a professional detachment, but I could see the curiosity dancing in his eyes. There, I said, capping the pen with a satisfying click. That consolidates the title deeds. Mr. Sterling pulled the stack of documents toward him. He adjusted his glasses and scanned the signatures. Now, for the absolute record, Harry, you confirm that the residential property located at 4400 Lakeview Drive and the commercial building at 101 Industrial Way are both sole assets of HC Holdings. Correct, I said, leaning back in the leather chair. And, Sterling continued, his voice dropping a decibel, you confirm that the occupants of said residential property, namely Brenda Coleman, Ryan Coleman, and their immediate family, have no legal claim to the title and are, in fact, merely tenants at will. They are guests, I corrected him, my voice cold. They are guests who have stayed too long and become tiresome. Guests who have breached the terms of their stay by attempting to sell off the owner's furniture. Sterling nodded slowly. He stamped the papers. The red ink looked like blood on the white page. Then the next document is legally binding. He pushed a sheet across the mahogany desk. It was an eviction notice. A standard form, simple and brutal. Notice to vacate. It gave the occupants exactly 60 minutes to clear their personal belongings from the premises before the locks were changed, and the police were contacted. 60 minutes to pack up a lifetime of lies. I stared at the paper. I thought about the house. I'd designed it. I'd picked out the marble for the foyer. I'd selected the spot for the garden where Ryan played as a boy. Signing this felt like burning down a church, but they had desecrated the altar. They'd turned my home into a den of thieves. I picked up the pen again. My hand hovered over the signature line. For a second, just a flicker, I hesitated. I saw Ryan's face as a child, looking up at me with those wide, innocent eyes. But then that image was replaced by the face of another man, the man who sat in my office laughing while he planned to send me to a state-run asylum. The hesitation vanished. I signed my name. The lines were sharp and jagged. The eviction order is drafted, Sterling said, sliding the paper into a folder marked confidential. Now about the lines of credit. This was the part I'd been waiting for. This was the moment the trap snapped shut. I want a total freeze, I said. Sterling opened his laptop and entered a string of security codes. Let's check the exposure. Brenda has a black card linked to the primary HC Holdings operating account. Ryan has a platinum business card and 3 supplementary cards for his wife and personal expenses. They also have access to corporate travel and dining accounts. With no limits, I muttered. They thought the money fell from the sky. As of this morning, their combined spending for the month is over $80,000, Sterling said, watching the screen. Mostly high-end fashion, jewelry, and a deposit for a villa rental in Tuscany. Tuscany? I let out a dry, hollow laugh. They hadn't even won the game yet, and they were already planning the victory lap. I want you to set a kill switch, I said. I want every card, line of credit, and access code terminated simultaneously. Not a decline due to insufficient funds. I want the system to flag these cards as stolen. I want to instruct merchants to confiscate the cards if they try to use them. Sterling tapped the keyboard for a moment, then looked up. We can arrange that. When would you like the freeze to take effect? I checked my watch. I calculated the timeline. Peterson's team would finish the forensic audit tomorrow morning. The equipment buyer was expecting to sign the contracts tomorrow afternoon. Ryan and Brenda would feel untouchable. They would be celebrating. Tomorrow at noon, I said. High noon, that's 0 hour. Sterling nodded. 0 hour. At 12 o'clock tomorrow, they will be financially bankrupt. They won't have the money to buy a stick of gum. And the mortgage application? I asked. Flagged, Sterling confirmed. The moment they try to sign off on the reverse mortgage or the equipment sale, the system will trigger a fraud alert. The bank won't just deny the loan. They'll lock the application and notify the authorities. You've effectively surrounded them, Harry. This is a siege. It's a siege, I said, and they don't even know the walls have already been breached. I stood up. I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. Hunting your own family was a terrible thing, but when they turned into predators, it became a necessary one. Thank you, Sterling, I said, reaching out to shake his hand. He gripped it firmly. Good luck, Harry. I hope you find what you're looking for. I stepped out of the bank and into the bright sunlight. I hailed a cab. I couldn't risk the bus today. I needed to get back to the house as quickly as possible. I needed to be in position. The cab ride was a blur. My mind was rehearsing the next 24 hours. I imagined the look on Brenda's face when the server at her favorite lunch spot handed her a card cut in half. I imagined Ryan breaking down when he tried to sign the sales documents, only to see the lawyers looking at him with suspicion. I arrived at the estate. The gates opened automatically for the taxi. I watched the house draw closer. It looked tall and majestic against the blue sky. But I knew it was just a house of cards, and I'd just pulled the bottom one out. I paid the cab fare with cash and walked to the front door. I let myself in. The house was in chaos. Suitcases lined the hallway. Expensive designer luggage was piled high. I walked into the living room. Brenda was there directing a maid on how to pack a box of crystal. Ryan was on the phone, pacing, looking excited. "Dad!" Ryan shouted when he saw me. He actually smiled, a genuine smile, or at least a very well-acted one. "You're back early." "I just went for a walk," I lied, letting my voice sound weak and raspy. "I sat in the park for a while." "That's great," Brenda said, not taking her eyes off the crystal. "Just stay out of the way, Harry. We're busy. We're heading out for a little vacation." "Vacation?" I asked, stumbling into the room and perching on the edge of the sofa. "Yeah," Ryan said, ending the call. "We're going to Italy for a few weeks to celebrate landing a huge deal." He winked at Brenda. She smirked smugly. "Sounds expensive," I said, clasping my hands together to hide the fact that they were clenched into fists. "Don't worry about the money, Dad," Ryan said, walking over and patting my shoulder. It was a patronizing pat, the kind you give a dog. "We've taken care of everything. The business is finally turning around. We're going to be very, very rich." I looked up at him. I looked into my son's eyes. He was glowing with greed. He had no idea that in less than 24 hours he'd be penniless. He had no idea that the credit cards in his pocket were ticking time bombs. "I'm happy for you, Ryan," I said. "I really am." I meant it. I was happy. I was happy that his true nature was so fully exposed. It made what I had to do next that much easier. "Make sure you pack everything you need," I said quietly. "You never know when you might be able to come back." They ignored me. They kept packing, discussing first-class seats and five-star hotels. They were discussing how to squander the money they'd stolen from me. I stood up and headed for the stairs. "Where are you going?" Brenda asked. "Back to my room," I said. "I'm tired. I want to take a nap." "Go ahead," she said. "Just make sure you're up for dinner. We ordered lobster, a final treat before we go." Lobster, paid for with my money. I climbed the stairs. Every step felt heavy. But it was a good kind of heavy. It was the weight of the judge's gavel before the sentence is read. I went into my room and closed the door. I walked to the window and looked out at the courtyard. 0 hour. Tomorrow at noon. I checked my watch. 18 hours left. I'd let them eat their lobster. I'd let them drink my wine. I'd let them sleep in my silk sheets one last time. Because when they woke up tomorrow, the world would be a very different place. I sat on the bed and pulled the eviction notice from my inner pocket. I smoothed it out. Notice to vacate. I set it on the nightstand right next to the photo of our whole family taken 10 years ago. In the photo, we were all smiling. We looked so happy. I turned the photo face down. That family was dead. The people downstairs were strangers. And tomorrow I would introduce them to the real landlord. The morning sun cast long, sharp lines across the mahogany desk through the blinds of my secret office. I hadn't slept. I'd spent the entire night staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence, waiting for the dawn that would bring the end of the family I thought I knew. Right at 8 o'clock, the heavy oak door opened, and Peterson walked in. He didn't knock, not with the timidity of the staff Ryan hired. He carried a thick black binder tucked under his arm like a priest holding a Bible at a funeral. He set the binder on the desk in front of me. The sound of it hitting the wood echoed through the spacious room. It was a heavy sound, the sound of judgment. "It's done," Peterson said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "The forensic team worked through the night. We have everything." I looked at the black cover. I didn't want to open it. As long as it stayed closed, there was still a small, foolish corner of my heart that hoped this was all just a misunderstanding. That my son was just incompetent, not a criminal, that my wife was just spoiled, not a thief. But I knew the truth. I reached out and flipped the cover back. The first page was a summary. The numbers were printed in bold red ink. Total misappropriated funds, $4,200,000. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. $4 million stolen in 6 months. I flipped to the next page. It contained the transaction breakdown. Ryan had been busy. He'd set up a fake vendor called RC Logistics. Coleman Construction was paying RC Logistics $50,000 a week in consulting fees. Consulting fees for a company that didn't even exist. He didn't even try to hide it. Peterson pointed to a line on the spreadsheet. He used his own home address for the shell company. He thought you'd never check. He thought he was smarter than the entire system. I traced the line with my finger. Ryan Coleman, my son. The boy who used to ask me for $5 to see a movie was now stealing $50,000 a week from his own father. But it gets worse, Peterson said. Turn to Section 3. I flipped through a few pages. Section 3 was labeled with the name Megan Coleman, my daughter-in-law, the woman who smiled at me on Thanksgiving and told me how much she admired my work ethic. The page was filled with credit card statements. The corporate Amex, Tiffany & Co., $40,000. Cartier, $65,000. Van Cleef and Arpels, $120,000. She listed these as office supplies, Peterson said, his voice dripping with disgust. She bought a diamond necklace and marked it as printer toner in the books. She bought a Rolex and marked it as employee training. I felt a cold, hard anger settling in my stomach. It wasn't about the money. I had plenty of money. It was the insult. They thought I was so stupid, so blind, that I couldn't tell the difference between a diamond necklace and a box of toner. Every time they swiped those cards, they were mocking me. Here's the smoking gun, Peterson said, flipping to the back of the binder. It was a copy of a wire transfer request dated for today. $12 million. This is the payment from the heavy equipment sale, Peterson explained. They're selling the cranes, the bulldozers, the excavators. They're stripping the company bare. This money is scheduled to be wired to a bank in the Caymans at 2 p.m. today. I checked the time. It was 9 a.m. They're cutting it close, I said. They're desperate, Peterson replied. They know the company is bleeding out because of their theft. They need this sale to cover their tracks and fund their flight to Italy. If this wire goes through, the company is dead. 200 people will be out of a job. It won't go through, I said, closing the binder. No, Peterson said. It won't, because we're going to stop them. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a smaller folder. Inside were 3 arrest warrants. I had to pull a favor with a prosecutor, Peterson said. Based on the evidence in this binder, he signed these an hour ago. Grand larceny, wire fraud, conspiracy to embezzle. I looked at the names on the warrants. Ryan Coleman, Brenda Coleman, Megan Coleman, my family, my wife, my son, my daughter-in-law. I picked up the warrants. The paper was light, but the weight of it was suffocating. I was about to send my entire family to prison. I was about to become an empty house. Are you sure you want to do this, Harry? Peterson asked softly. Once we execute these, there's no turning back. You can still call it off. You can just fire them. You can just kick them out. You don't have to lock them up. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked down over the city for the last time. I thought of that dinner table. I thought of Agnes calling me a freeloader. I thought of Brenda making me ask for lunch money. I thought of the nursing home brochure in Ryan's trash can. They hadn't shown me any mercy. Peterson, I said, my voice like steel. They were planning to lock me up. They were planning to erase me. If I let them go, they'll just look for the next victim. They'll do the same thing to someone else. Ryan will teach his own kids to do this. I turned to face him. No, the cycle ends here. I walked back to the desk and picked up the black binder. I gripped it tightly. This was my weapon. This was my shield. What's the plan? Peterson asked. I checked my watch. It's 9:30. They're at the house packing for Italy. They think they're flying out tonight. They think the money will be in the account this afternoon. I tucked the warrants into my inner pocket. I'm going home, I said. I'm going to ask them for lunch money one last time. I'm going to give them one last chance to show even a shred of humanity. One last chance to confess. And if they don't? Peterson asked. Then execute the warrants, I said. Have the police on standby. Tell them to wait around the corner. When I give the signal, I want them to break down the front door. What's the signal? Peterson asked. I'll text you, I said. One word, justice. Peterson nodded. He looked at me with a strange expression. Maybe it was sadness or respect. You're a strong man, Harry, he said. Stronger than I could ever be. I'm not strong, Peterson, I said, walking toward the door. I'm just a builder. When a building starts to rot from the core, you can't just paint the outside. You have to tear it down. I walked out of the office. The binder tucked under my arm felt heavy. The descent in the elevator felt like a drop into the underworld. I walked out onto the street and hailed a cab. To the suburbs, I told the driver, and drive as fast as you can. As the city faded behind me, I opened the binder again. I looked at the picture of the diamond necklace Megan had bought. It was beautiful. It would look excellent in an evidence locker. I looked at the $12 million wire transfer. Freedom, Ryan had written on the brochure. He was right. He was buying freedom, but not for himself. He was buying my freedom. Freedom from his lies. Freedom from his greed. Freedom from the burden of trying to save a son who never wanted to be saved. The cab pulled up to the estate gates. They stood wide open. I saw a moving truck parked in the driveway. They weren't just taking clothes. They were packing the furniture. They were taking the paintings. It was like they were looting the palace before burning it down. I paid and stepped out. The sun was bright. The birds were singing. It was a beautiful day for a funeral. I walked up the driveway, my heart hammered like a drum in my chest. Thump, thump, thump. I reached the front door. It stood wide open. I could hear music playing inside. Upbeat, rhythmic music. They were celebrating. I gripped the binder tightly. I stepped across the threshold. The lion was home. The hunt was over. I walked into the living room, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the crisp smell of new leather luggage. The room looked like a VIP lounge. Louis Vuitton trunks were piled high by the door, ready to be whisked away on their first-class flight to Rome. My wife, Brenda, had a glass of champagne in her hand, her cheeks flushed with the excitement of spending money she hadn't earned. Ryan was showing Megan pictures of the villa they'd rented in Tuscany, the villa that cost more for 1 week than most honest people earned in a year. Agnes sat in my favorite armchair like a queen on a throne, criticizing the maid for not packing her silk scarves correctly. They were so happy. They were so confident. When they saw me walk in, their smiles didn't vanish, but they soured. They turned from pure joy into mockery. I was a stain on their perfect picture. I was the old dog that had to be put outside so the party could continue. I stopped in the middle of the room. I let my shoulders slump. I let my hands tremble slightly at my sides. I made my eyes look watery and confused. I had to play the part. I had to make them believe I was completely broken. "Brenda," I began, my voice cracking just enough to sound pathetic, "I need to talk to you." Brenda sighed and rolled her eyes at Megan. She took a slow sip of her champagne and turned to me. "What is it now, Harry? Don't you see we're busy? The car will be here in an hour." "It's about breakfast," I said, looking down at my shoes. "I went to the store to get some eggs, but I think I lost the card. The one you gave me. I can't find it anywhere." Ryan laughed. It was a sharp barking sound. "You lost it? Dad, it had $500 on it. Do you have any idea how irresponsible that is?" "I'm sorry," I mumbled. I'm hungry, Brenda. I haven't eaten since yesterday. Could you just give me $20 so I can go get some pancakes at the diner?" The room went quiet. This was the moment of total submission. I was in a house worth millions, begging for $20. Brenda set her glass down. She walked toward me, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She stopped inches from my face. She smelled of vintage wine and arrogance. $20? She repeated softly. "Please," I said, "just 20. She smiled. It was a cruel, twisted smile. "No." I looked up at her, pretending to be shocked. "No." "Harry, I told you." She raised her voice so everyone could hear. "I told you that you have to learn to behave. Do you think money grows on trees? Do you think you can lose your allowance and come crawling to me to beg? Well, let this be a lesson. If you lose the card, you don't eat. Maybe being hungry will help you remember where you put it. But Brenda, I pleaded, reaching out a trembling hand toward her arm. She jerked back as if I were a contagion. Don't you touch me. I'm your husband. You're a burden, she spat. You're an infant in an old man's body. I'm done taking care of you. Agnes chimed in from the armchair, her voice like grinding glass. That's right, Brenda. Stand your ground. If you give him money now, he'll never learn. Without money, a man is nothing but noise. Keep him poor, and you keep him obedient. That's how you train a dog, and that's how you train a husband. Ryan walked over and shook his head. Dad, honestly, this is embarrassing. You're making a fool of yourself. Go back to your room. We'll leave you some crackers before we head to the airport. Crackers? I looked at them. Ryan, my son. Megan wearing a diamond necklace stolen with my company's money. Brenda, the woman I'd loved for 40 years. Agnes, the parasite I'd supported for decades. They were enjoying this. They were feeding off my humiliation. It empowered them. It justified what they were doing. In their minds, I was weak, so I deserved to be crushed. I looked at the grandfather clock in the corner. Tick, tock. The minute hand moved. It clicked into the top position. 12 o'clock. 0 hour. I took a deep breath, held it for a second, then let it out. And then the sound of the future arrived. The first was Brenda's phone, a sharp, rapid ping. Then another. Then a machine gun series of vibrations began on the tabletop. Then Ryan's phone in his pocket began to buzz. Megan's watch lit up. Brenda frowned and picked up her phone. Who is texting me so much? She muttered. She unlocked the screen. Her eyes went wide. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. What is it? Ryan asked, pulling out his own phone. His face went pale. He looked at the screen, swiped, and then tapped frantically. My card, Ryan stammered. I just got an alert. My business card for the villa deposit was declined. They said payment was revoked. That's impossible, Brenda snapped. I just checked the balance this morning. She tapped her screen again. It says the account is frozen, she whispered in horror. Suspicious activity. Contact card issuer immediately. Megan screamed. Mine too. I was just trying to order an Uber Black, and it says payment method invalid. What the hell is going on? Is the banking system down? Ryan looked up, panic setting in. It must be a glitch, a system-wide glitch. I'm calling the bank. He dialed the number, put it on speaker. The automated voice echoed through the hall, loud and cheerful. I'm sorry. Account ending in 4590 has been flagged for suspected criminal activity and is currently under federal investigation. If you are the account holder, please do not hang up and hold for law enforcement. Ryan's hand slipped, and the phone hit the floor with a dull thud. Criminal activity? Agnes gasped. What did you do, you idiot? You triggered an audit. I didn't do anything, Ryan yelled. We were careful. I stood up straight. I wasn't standing like the old man who wanted pancakes anymore. I stood like the man who built skyscrapers. I squared my shoulders. The tremor in my hands vanished instantly. I buttoned my jacket with steady, precise movements. I looked at them, and the mask fell away. My eyes weren't watery anymore. They were clear, cold, and hard as granite. That's not a glitch, Ryan, I said. My voice was deep and resonant, filling the entire room. They all turned to look at me. They looked confused, as if they were looking at a stranger. Harry, Brenda's voice trembled. What are you talking about? I walked over to the table with the champagne. I picked up the bottle. I looked at the label. You told me I had to beg you for every cent, Brenda, I said calmly. You told me that without money I was nothing but noise. I poured the expensive champagne onto the floor. It splashed onto the Persian rug, sizzling and foaming white. Well, I have some bad news for you, I continued. You're the ones who are bankrupt. Dad? Ryan stepped forward, trying to regain control. Dad, stop it. Did you call the bank? Did you move the accounts? You have no idea what you're doing. You're going to ruin the trip. I snapped my head toward him. The pressure in my gaze stopped him in his tracks. I know exactly what I'm doing, I said, because I am the primary account holder. I am the chairman of the board, and I have just cut you off. What do you mean? Brenda whispered. I mean the cards in your hands are plastic trash, I said. I mean the villa in Italy is gone. I mean the first-class tickets are canceled. You can't do that, Megan screamed. We're authorized users. You were authorized users on HC Holdings accounts, I roared. That is my company, my money. And as of 12 o'clock today, HC Holdings has terminated all subsidiary privileges due to gross negligence and theft. Theft? Agnes gasped. How dare you? I reached into my jacket pocket. I didn't pull out a handkerchief. I pulled out the black binder Peterson had given me. It was heavy. I threw it. I didn't hand it to them. I hurled it across the room. It spun through the air and slammed into Ryan's chest. He clutched his chest and stumbled back. Open it, I commanded. Ryan's hands were shaking now. Truly shaking, not the way I'd faked earlier. He opened the binder. He saw the red numbers. He saw the list of shell companies. He saw the emails he thought he'd deleted. How? He whispered. How did you get this? You thought I was senile, I said, taking a step toward him. You thought I was a helpless old man who only cared about gardening and naps. You forgot who I am, son. I'm the one who taught you how to read, and I just read your diary. I looked at Brenda. She was as pale as a sheet, gripping the sofa for support. You wanted to put me in a home, Brenda, I said softly. A government-subsidized facility. You wanted to drug me and forget me while you went off to squander the work of my life. Harry, I folded the check into the note and slipped it into an envelope. I sealed it. I pressed my thumb against the flap, feeling a sense of finality. I pressed the intercom button on my desk. Susan, could you come in for a moment? My new assistant, a sharp young girl working her way through law school, walked in. What can I do for you, Mr. Coleman? Please send this out, I said, handing her the envelope. Certified mail. I want to make sure she signs for it personally. No problem, she said, taking the envelope. Anything else? No, Susan, I said, that's all. She left the room. I leaned back in my chair. I imagined the scene when Brenda received the envelope. I imagined her seeing the return address. I imagined her opening it, hands trembling, hoping for a reconciliation, hoping for a return to her old life. Then I imagined her seeing the check, $500, and the note. It was cruel. I knew it was cruel, but it was also necessary. It was the final period at the end of a long, painful sentence. It was my way of telling her that the dynamic between us had changed permanently. I was no longer the beggar. I was the benefactor. And she, at long last, had learned the value of $1. I took another sip of my coffee. It was cold now, but that didn't matter. I felt warm inside. I looked around my office. It was quiet. For a long time, I had feared this silence. I thought silence meant loneliness. I thought a noisy house, even one filled with vipers, was better than an empty one. I was wrong. Silence isn't empty. It's filled with answers. It's filled with peace. I picked up the phone and called Frank. Frank, I said. Yes, Harry? About that new hospital wing project, I said. Double the donation to the pediatric center. Double? Frank asked. That's a significant amount of money, Harry. I know, I said, looking at the empty spot on my desk where the family photo used to sit. But I learned something, Frank. Money is like water. If you hoard it, it stagnates and rots. If you let it flow, it brings life. I want my money used to build things, not to destroy people. I understand, Harry, Frank said softly. I'll have the paperwork ready. I hung up the phone. I stood up and walked to the window one last time. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the city of Chicago. I'm 72 years old. I'm single. My son is in prison. My ex-wife is a waitress. By societal standards, my personal life is a disaster. But as I watched the city lights flicker on, one by one, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. I kept my dignity. I kept my sanity. I kept my company. And most importantly, I kept the truth. I am not a freeloader. I am not a senile old man. I am Harry Coleman. I am a builder. And my greatest project has only just begun. Living the rest of my life on my own terms. The lion wasn't sleeping. The lion was awake. And for the first time in a very long time, the jungle was quiet. From this story, we learn a harsh but necessary truth about the nature of relationships and resources. Blood may link us biologically, but it guarantees neither loyalty, respect, nor love. True family is defined by how they treat you when you are vulnerable, not by how they extract value from you when you are strong. Harry's experience teaches us that financial independence is the ultimate form of self-defense. We must never hand over the keys to our lives, our dignity, or our hard-earned success to anyone, even our children, without first verifying their character. Generosity without boundaries isn't love. It's just fuel for entitlement. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is cut the cord and let people face the consequences of their own actions.